does it take to turn betrayal into blessing? Few stories in history capture the raw complexity of human emotions, the power of divine providence, and the ultimate triumph of faith, like the story of Joseph. His life unfolds as a dramatic tapestry of twists and turns, moments of crushing despair followed by miraculous elevations and a persistent thread of hope that runs through it all. It's a story of transformation, resilience, and unwavering trust in God's plans. A story that begins in the fields of Canaan and rises to the palaces of Egypt, touching every facet of human experience along the way. Joseph's journey begins in a family rife with tension and favoritism. The 11th of 12 brothers, Joseph was born to Jacob and his beloved wife Rachel. From the start, Joseph stood apart. His father's deep love for him was evident in the lavish attention he received, symbolized most famously by the coat of many colors, a garment that was more than a gift. It was a statement of Joseph's unique position in Jacob's heart. But love for one son often breeds resentment in others, and Joseph's brothers viewed him not as family, but as a rival. This jealousy would fester, driving the brothers to an act of betrayal that would change Joseph's life forever. Yet, Joseph's distinction wasn't just a matter of his father's affection. It was woven into his destiny. As a young man, Joseph began to have dreams, visions that were extraordinary in their implications. In one dream, he saw sheaves of wheat, with his brother's sheaves bowing down to his. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. These dreams were not subtle. They foretold a future where Joseph would rise to a position of prominence, even over his family. But for his brothers, these dreams were an insult, a challenge to their authority and status. To Joseph, they were a glimpse of God's plan. To his brothers, they were the final straw. What sets Joseph apart is not just his ability to dream, but his courage to share those dreams, even in the face of hostility. This audacity, born from faith, is both his strength and the catalyst for his trials. His brothers' jealousy turned into hatred, and their hatred turned into a plan to eliminate Joseph from their lives. Betrayed by the very people who should have loved him most, Joseph's life takes a downward spiral, one that seems at first to contradict the grand visions of his dreams. But as we'll see, what appears to be the end of Joseph's story is merely the beginning of God's intricate plan. The story of Joseph is not just a tale of personal triumph. It's a reflection of the divine hand that guides human destiny. Throughout his life, Joseph faces unimaginable adversity. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, and forgotten in the depths of an Egyptian prison. Yet in each of these moments, Joseph's faith remains unshaken. He continues to trust in the God who gave him those dreams, believing that even in the darkest times, there is a purpose to his suffering. This faith becomes the anchor that keeps Joseph steady, allowing him to rise above circumstances that would break most people. But Joseph's story is more than one of survival. It's a story of transformation. The young, naive dreamer who once boldly declared his visions to his family becomes a man of wisdom and humility, forged by the trials he endures. His journey from the pit to the palace is not just a physical ascent, but a spiritual one, as Joseph grows into the leader God intended him to be. By the time he rises to power in Egypt, Joseph is no longer just the favored son of Jacob. He is a man of vision, integrity, and unparalleled influence. His faith, tested in the fires of adversity, shines brightly, illuminating the path for others to follow. Central to Joseph's story is the theme of forgiveness, a forgiveness that is as radical as it is transformative. When Joseph finally confronts his brothers, the same men who betrayed him and sold him into slavery, he doesn't seek revenge. Instead, he extends grace, declaring one of the most profound truths in Scripture. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. In this moment, Joseph not only heals the wounds of his own heart, but also restores the bonds of a fractured family. His forgiveness becomes a mirror of God's grace, a reminder that even the deepest pain can be redeemed for a greater purpose. The story of Joseph is also a testament to the sovereignty of God, a God who weaves even the darkest threads of human experience into a tapestry of glory. Each twist and turn in Joseph's life, from the betrayal by his brothers to his rise in Pharaoh's court, is a piece of a divine puzzle, that ultimately saves not only his family, but an entire region from famine. This sovereignty is a central theme of Joseph's story, offering a powerful reminder that God's plans are always greater than our own. Even when the path seems unclear or the journey unbearable, Joseph's life assures us that God is always at work, orchestrating events for his glory and our good. As we begin this journey into the life of Joseph, it's important to recognize that his story is not just an ancient tale. It's a story for all of us. It's a reminder that our struggles, no matter how overwhelming, are never wasted in God's hands. Like Joseph, we may face moments of betrayal, hardship, or uncertainty, but his life shows us that these moments are often the very ones that shape us into who we are meant to be. Joseph's resilience, his faith, and his ability to forgive are timeless lessons that resonate across generations, offering hope and inspiration to anyone seeking to understand the purpose behind life's challenges. The story of Joseph invites us to reflect on our own lives and the ways in which God is working, even when we can't see it. It challenges us to trust in his plans, to remain faithful in the face of adversity, and to embrace the transformative power of forgiveness. As we delve into this remarkable tale, let us open our hearts to the lessons it offers and the ways it can inspire us to live with greater faith, purpose, and resilience. Prepare to be captivated by the life of a man whose journey from betrayal to blessing is a testament to the unyielding faithfulness of God. Joseph's early life was marked by favor and promise, yet it was this very favor that set the stage for the trials and triumphs that would define his journey. Born into a family of 12 sons, Joseph was the 11th child of Jacob, but his position in the family hierarchy was anything but ordinary. As the firstborn son of Jacob's beloved wife Rachel, Joseph held a special place in his father's heart, a position that was evident to everyone in the household. Jacob's affection for Joseph was not subtle. It was declared in the form of a gift that would become both a symbol of love and a catalyst for strife. A richly adorned coat of many colors. The coat was more than just a garment. In a culture where clothing often signified status and identity, the multicolored robe was a bold declaration of Joseph's favored position. For Joseph, it may have been a tangible expression of his father's love, but for his brothers, it was a glaring reminder of their father's favoritism, a favoritism that excluded them. The coat became a lightning rod for their simmering jealousy, amplifying their resentment toward Joseph. Each time he wore it, the brothers saw not just a favored son, but a rival, a challenge to the natural order of their family. As if the coat weren't enough to ignite their jealousy, Joseph's actions and words further fueled the flames. At the age of 17, Joseph began to have dreams, visions that were vivid, striking, and laden with meaning. In one of these dreams, he saw himself in a field with his brothers, binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly, his brothers' sheaves gathered around his and bowed down to it. In another dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. These dreams were prophetic, foretelling a future where Joseph would rise to a position of prominence and authority. Yet, in his youthful enthusiasm, Joseph made the mistake of sharing these dreams with his family. The reactions were immediate and explosive. To Jacob, the dreams were confusing and unsettling. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" he asked, his tone a mix of incredulity and concern. To his brothers, the dreams were an insult, an audacious claim that their younger sibling would one day rule over them. Each retelling of Joseph's dreams deepened the rift between him and his brothers, stoking their jealousy into a burning hatred. Joseph, perhaps unaware of the depth of their resentment, continued to wear his coat and speak of his dreams, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Joseph's dreams were not merely the imaginings of a young boy. They were a glimpse into a divine plan that would unfold in ways no one could have anticipated. These visions, given by God, were not about personal ambition or vanity. They were a foreshadowing of Joseph's role in preserving his family and fulfilling God's covenantal promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet, at the time, neither Joseph nor his family could fully grasp their significance. To the brothers, the dreams were a threat to their status and identity, challenging the patriarchal order that defined their lives. To Jacob, they were perplexing, raising questions about the path God had chosen for his son. The tension in the family grew with each passing day. Joseph's favored status, symbolized by the coat, and his dreams of dominance created a toxic environment in which jealousy and hatred festered. The brothers began to view Joseph not as their sibling, but as an obstacle to be removed. Their jealousy was not just about the coat or the dreams. It was about the deeper wounds of feeling overlooked and unloved. Jacob's overt favoritism toward Joseph, whether intentional or not, had created a rift in the family that would soon reach a breaking point. What makes Joseph's early life so compelling is the interplay of human flaws and divine purpose. Jacob's favoritism, Joseph's naivety, and the brothers' jealousy all contribute to the unfolding drama. Yet beneath it all lies the sovereign hand of God, orchestrating events to fulfill his greater plan. Joseph's dreams, while a source of conflict, were also a sign of God's presence in his life, a reassurance that even in the midst of familial strife, he was part of a divine story far larger than himself. These dreams would sustain Joseph in the years to come, serving as a beacon of hope in the darkest moments of his journey. As we reflect on Joseph's early life, it's easy to see parallels to our own experiences. How often do we find ourselves grappling with feelings of jealousy, favoritism, or misunderstanding within our families? Joseph's story reminds us that even in the midst of broken relationships and human failings, God is at work, shaping us for his purposes. The coat, the dreams, and the brothers' jealousy were not random occurrences. They were pieces of a divine puzzle that would eventually reveal a greater picture of redemption and reconciliation. At this point in the story, Joseph's life seems poised for disaster. His brothers' jealousy has turned into outright hatred, and their frustration with their father's favoritism has reached a boiling point. Yet, even as the tension builds, there is a sense that Joseph's journey is just beginning. His dreams, though misunderstood, are a promise of what is to come, a promise that will carry him through the trials ahead. As we move forward, we will see how these early moments of favor, jealousy, and vision set the stage for a story of resilience, transformation, and the unwavering faithfulness of God. Joseph the dreamer was about to become Joseph the betrayed, thrust into circumstances that would challenge his faith and reshape his identity. But through it all, the dreams that once made him the target of jealousy would become the foundation of his hope. What his brothers meant for harm, God would use for good, proving that no amount of human jealousy or hatred can thwart the plans of a sovereign God. This is the beginning of Joseph's remarkable journey, a journey that would take him from the fields of Canaan to the heart of Egypt, and from the depths of despair to the heights of power. The resentment Joseph's brothers felt toward him had been simmering for years, stoked by their father's favoritism and Joseph's dreams of superiority. But resentment, when left unchecked, has a way of festering into something darker, something more dangerous. For Joseph's brothers, their jealousy turned into a hatred so consuming that it blinded them to their familial bond. What began as quiet murmurs of discontent soon evolved into a sinister plan, one that would change the course of their family's history forever. One fateful day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the family's flocks near Shechem. It was a task Joseph approached with dutiful enthusiasm, unaware of the danger that awaited him. As his brothers saw him approaching in the distance, his distinctive coat of many colors shimmering in the sunlight, their anger boiled over. "Here comes that dreamer," one of them sneered, the words dripping with disdain. The sight of Joseph, oblivious to their bitterness, ignited a fury they could no longer suppress. This was their chance, they thought, a chance to rid themselves of the boy who had disrupted their lives and threatened their status. Their plan was swift and ruthless. "Let's kill him," one brother suggested, his voice cold and unfeeling. They imagined the freedom they would gain from silencing Joseph forever, from erasing the source of their frustration. But even in their hatred, a shred of reason remained. Reuben, the eldest, spoke up, his voice a hesitant counterpoint to their rage. "Let's not take his life," he said, suggesting they throw Joseph into a nearby cistern instead. His intention, though unspoken, was to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. Reuben's words bought Joseph a temporary reprieve, but his brother's intent remained clear. They would make Joseph suffer for his dreams, for his coat, and for the favor he held in their father's eyes. When Joseph arrived, his greeting was met not with warmth but with violence. Before he could even grasp what was happening, his brothers seized him, tearing the beloved coat from his body, a symbolic stripping of his father's favor. Without mercy, they threw him into a dry cistern, a pit that became a physical representation of their disdain for him. As Joseph cried out from the depths begging for their mercy, his brothers sat down to eat, their hearts hardened against his pleas. They had silenced the dreamer, or so they thought. But the story didn't end there. As they ate, a caravan of Midianite traders approached in the distance, their camels laden with spices and goods bound for Egypt. Seeing an opportunity, Judah proposed a new plan, one that would rid them of Joseph while profiting from his misfortune. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" Judah reasoned. "Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." It was a twisted rationale, an attempt to justify their betrayal under the guise of mercy. The brothers agreed, and with cold detachment, they pulled Joseph from the cistern and sold him to the traders for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. For Joseph, the betrayal was incomprehensible. Bound and led away by strangers, he watched as his brothers, the very people he had trusted most, turned their backs on him. The dreamer was now a prisoner, his visions of greatness seeming like cruel mockery in the face of his new reality. As the caravan journeyed toward Egypt, the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on Joseph. He had lost his family, his freedom, and his coat, but he hadn't lost his faith. Though he couldn't yet see it, God's hand was still on his life, guiding him through the pain toward a purpose far greater than he could imagine. Back in Canaan, the brothers faced the task of concealing their crime. Deception came naturally to them, as it had to their father Jacob in his youth. Taking Joseph's coat, they slaughtered a goat and dipped the garment in its blood, creating a grisly illusion of tragedy. When they returned home, they presented the bloodied coat to Jacob, feigning ignorance. "We found this," they said. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." The words were deliberate, distancing themselves from Joseph by referring to him not as their brother, but as Jacob's son. Their deception worked. Jacob recognized the coat immediately, and his grief was overwhelming. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Jacob's sorrow was profound, a mourning so deep that it consumed him. Tearing his clothes and putting on sackcloth, he declared that he would mourn Joseph until the day he died. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but Jacob refused to be consoled. For the brothers, their father's anguish was a constant reminder of their betrayal, a wound they had inflicted but could not heal. They had rid themselves of Joseph, but in doing so, they had brought an unshakable shadow over their family. Meanwhile, Joseph's journey continued. The caravan of Midianite traders brought him to Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The betrayal that had torn him from his family now placed him in a foreign land, surrounded by unfamiliar customs and people. Yet, even in this dark chapter of his life, God was with Joseph. Though stripped of his coat, his freedom, and his family, Joseph still carried within him the dreams that God had given him. The dreams that would one day become his reality. The betrayal of Joseph by his brothers is one of the most harrowing moments in his story, a stark reminder of the destructive power of jealousy and the depths of human depravity. Yet, it is also a pivotal moment, one that sets the stage for God's redemptive work. What the brothers meant for harm, God would use for good, weaving their betrayal into a greater plan that none of them could yet see. For Joseph, this moment of despair was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a journey that would take him from the pit to the palace, from betrayal to blessing. As we reflect on this chapter, we are reminded of the ways in which pain and betrayal can shape us. Like Joseph, we may face moments when those closest to us turn against us, when the dreams we hold dear seem shattered beyond repair. But Joseph's story assures us that even in the darkest moments, God is at work, transforming our trials into triumphs and our suffering into purpose. Joseph's journey to Egypt was not an accident or a detour. It was a step on the path toward the fulfillment of God's promises, a path that would ultimately lead to redemption, restoration, and the salvation of many. Joseph's arrival in Egypt marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one defined by servitude, hardship, and an unwavering faith in the God who remained with him even in the depths of his despair. Sold by the Midianite traders to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard, Joseph found himself thrust into an unfamiliar world. Egypt was a land of grandeur and power, but for Joseph it was a place of isolation and loss. Stripped of his freedom, his family, and the multicolored coat that symbolized his father's love, Joseph could have succumbed to bitterness and despair. Yet he chose a different path. Instead of dwelling on his suffering, Joseph threw himself into his work, determined to honor God even as a slave. Potiphar soon recognized something extraordinary about Joseph. There was a diligence and integrity in him that set him apart from the other servants. More than that, Potiphar saw that Joseph's success was not merely the result of hard work, but of divine favor. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper. The fields yielded abundantly, the household ran with precision, and Potiphar's wealth grew under Joseph's management. It became clear that the Lord was with Joseph, blessing him in all that he did. Impressed by his servant's abilities and character, Potiphar entrusted Joseph with more and more responsibility until he eventually placed him in charge of his entire household. As overseer, Joseph managed everything Potiphar owned, from the servants to the fields, and Potiphar had complete confidence in him. With Joseph in charge, Potiphar remarked, "I need not concern myself with anything except the food I eat." For Joseph, this position of trust and authority was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Though far from the family and home he loved, Joseph experienced a measure of stability and purpose in Potiphar's household. Yet, even in this season of relative peace, trouble was brewing. Potiphar's wife, noticing Joseph's good looks and charm, became infatuated with him. Her desire for Joseph grew into an obsession, and she began to make advances toward him. Day after day, she attempted to seduce him, her persistence a relentless test of Joseph's character. Joseph's response to her advances was resolute. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he said, refusing her with a firm yet respectful tone. Joseph's words revealed the depth of his integrity and his unwavering commitment to honor God above all else. For Joseph, this was not merely a matter of loyalty to Potiphar, though that was certainly part of it. At its core, his refusal was about his relationship with God, a relationship that guided every decision he made, even in the face of temptation. Yet, Potiphar's wife was not easily deterred. Her infatuation turned to anger, and her attempts to seduce Joseph grew more aggressive. One day, when the household was empty, she seized the opportunity to corner Joseph, grabbing his cloak and demanding that he lie with her. Joseph, understanding the danger of the situation, did the only thing he could. He fled. Leaving his cloak in her hands, he ran from the house, determined to escape the trap she had set. But his righteous act came at a great cost. Humiliated and enraged by his rejection, Potiphar's wife concocted a lie that would destroy Joseph's standing in the household. Holding his cloak as evidence, she accused him of attempting to assault her. Her cries drew the attention of the other servants, and when Potiphar returned home, she repeated her fabricated story, painting herself as a victim and Joseph as the aggressor. Potiphar was furious. Whether he fully believed his wife's accusation or simply felt compelled to act to preserve his household's honor, he had Joseph thrown into prison. Just as quickly as he had risen to a position of prominence in Potiphar's household, Joseph was cast down again, this time into the darkness of an Egyptian dungeon. It was a devastating blow, a punishment he didn't deserve for a crime he didn't commit. Yet even in this bleak and unjust situation, Joseph's faith did not falter. He had been stripped of his position, his freedom, and even his reputation, but he still held fast to the God who had been with him every step of the way. In prison, Joseph's character once again shone brightly. Though the dungeon was a place of despair for many, Joseph brought a sense of order and hope to the chaos. The Lord was with him, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, who soon entrusted him with the management of the other prisoners. It was a pattern that had repeated itself in Potiphar's house and was now unfolding again in the depths of the dungeon. Joseph's faithfulness in small things led to greater responsibilities, and God's favor elevated him even in the lowest of circumstances. Joseph's time in prison was a test of endurance and faith. He could have become bitter, railing against the injustice of his situation and the betrayal that had brought him there. Instead, he chose to remain faithful, trusting that God's plan was still at work even in the darkness. His unwavering integrity and resilience became a testimony to the other prisoners and the warden, who marveled at his composure and wisdom. Though he was physically confined, Joseph's spirit remained free, sustained by the dreams that God had placed in his heart long ago. This chapter of Joseph's life illustrates the recurring theme of his story: God's presence in the midst of adversity. From Potiphar's household to the prison walls, Joseph's life was a testament to the power of faith and the ways in which God can use even the most difficult circumstances to prepare us for greater things. Though falsely accused and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph's response was not one of despair, but of steadfast trust in the God who had given him his dreams. Little did he know, this time in the dungeon was not an end, but another step on the path toward the fulfillment of those dreams. Joseph's journey as a slave in Egypt reminds us that faithfulness in the face of injustice is never wasted. His integrity, tested in the crucible of temptation and betrayal, became the foundation for the remarkable life that lay ahead. Though he was far from the fields of Canaan and the father who loved him, Joseph remained close to the God who had never abandoned him. In the depths of the dungeon, God was still at work, shaping Joseph into the man he was destined to become. A man whose story would not only save his family, but also inspire countless generations to trust in the sovereignty of God. Joseph's time in the Egyptian dungeon was a period of profound testing, yet even in the darkness of his circumstances, his light could not be hidden. The prison, a place meant to strip people of their dignity and hope, became a stage where Joseph's character and gifts would once again shine. Though unjustly imprisoned, Joseph carried himself with integrity and faith, earning the trust and respect of the prison warden. Over time, he was placed in charge of the other prisoners, a position of responsibility that reflected the divine favor that continued to follow him, even in captivity. Among the prisoners were two men who had once served in Pharaoh's court, his chief cupbearer and chief baker. Both had fallen out of favor with Pharaoh and were now confined to the same dungeon as Joseph. These men, accustomed to the splendor of the royal palace, found themselves thrust into the grim reality of the prison. It was here, in the most unlikely of places, that their paths crossed with Joseph's, setting the stage for a moment of divine revelation that would alter the course of Joseph's life. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had troubling dreams that seemed to carry a deeper meaning but left them bewildered and anxious. As Joseph went about his duties, he noticed their distress and asked them, "Why do you look so sad today?" Their response revealed their dilemma. "We both had dreams," they said, "but there is no one to interpret them." In the ancient world, dreams were often regarded as messages from the divine, and interpreting them was considered both an art and a gift. Joseph, recognizing this as an opportunity to use the gift God had given him, responded with humility and faith. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer spoke first, describing his dream with vivid detail. "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." Joseph listened carefully, and as the dream unfolded, God revealed its meaning to him. "This is what it means," Joseph explained. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer." The interpretation brought a glimmer of hope to the cupbearer. But Joseph's words didn't end there. Seizing the moment, Joseph made a heartfelt request. "When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Joseph's plea was simple, but filled with longing, a longing to be free, to see justice restored, and to return to the life he had lost. Encouraged by the favorable interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, the baker stepped forward to share his own. "I too had a dream," he said. "On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's heart must have been heavy as he listened, for the interpretation that God revealed to him was not one of restoration, but of judgment. "This is what it means," Joseph said solemnly. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." The baker's face fell as Joseph spoke, the weight of the interpretation settling over him like a shadow. Joseph's honesty in delivering the message, even when it was difficult, reflected his unwavering commitment to truth and his trust in God's wisdom. He did not soften the words to spare the baker's feelings. Instead, he faithfully conveyed the meaning of the dream, knowing that the ultimate purpose lay in God's hands. 3 days later, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday with a grand feast for his officials, and the events unfolded exactly as Joseph had interpreted. The cupbearer was restored to his position, placing Pharaoh's cup once again in his hand, while the baker was executed, his body impaled just as Joseph had foretold. The accuracy of Joseph's interpretations was undeniable, a testament to the divine gift that God had placed within him. For Joseph, this moment was a confirmation of his calling, a reminder that even in the depths of the dungeon, God's presence and purpose were at work. Yet despite the fulfillment of the dreams and Joseph's plea to the cupbearer, his situation did not change. The cupbearer, now restored to his position of influence, forgot all about Joseph. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, until 2 full years had passed. For Joseph, the waiting must have been excruciating. He had done everything right, serving faithfully, interpreting the dreams accurately, and humbly asking for help, yet the freedom he longed for remained out of reach. It was a season of prolonged silence, a time when Joseph's faith was tested in the crucible of patience. During those 2 years, Joseph could have succumbed to despair, questioning whether God had abandoned him. But instead, he chose to trust. Though his circumstances seemed unchanging, Joseph's faith remained steadfast. He continued to fulfill his responsibilities in the prison, serving with diligence and integrity, knowing that God's timing is always perfect. What Joseph couldn't see in the moment was that his waiting was not a delay, but a preparation. God was working behind the scenes, aligning events that would soon catapult Joseph from the depths of the dungeon to the heights of power. The story of Joseph's time in the dungeon is a powerful reminder of the importance of faithfulness in the waiting. It teaches us that even when our prayers seem unanswered and our circumstances appear stagnant, God is still at work, orchestrating his plans in ways we cannot yet understand. Joseph's ability to interpret the dreams of the cupbearer and baker was a demonstration of his divine gift, but it was also a foreshadowing of the greater purpose that God had for his life. Though forgotten by the cupbearer, Joseph was not forgotten by God. The silence of those 2 years was not an absence of God's presence, but a deliberate part of his plan, a plan that would soon unfold in ways that Joseph could never have imagined. Joseph's rise to power began on what seemed like an ordinary day in the dungeon, a day indistinguishable from the countless others he had endured during his years of unjust imprisonment. Yet, this was the moment when God's intricate plan began to unfold in ways that would change Joseph's life and shape the destiny of nations. Far away in Pharaoh's palace, the most powerful ruler in Egypt was troubled by a pair of dreams that left him restless and perplexed. Pharaoh's dreams, vivid and enigmatic, defied the understanding of his magicians and wise men. In desperation, Pharaoh sought someone who could unravel their meaning. It was then, after 2 long years of silence, that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Struck by the accuracy of Joseph's interpretation of his own dream, the cupbearer spoke up. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. There was a young Hebrew in prison who interpreted my dream and the bakers, and things turned out exactly as he said." Pharaoh wasted no time. Joseph was summoned from the depths of the dungeon, hurriedly shaved and dressed to appear before the king of Egypt. It was a moment of stark contrast. The same man who had been abandoned and forgotten was now standing in the presence of the most powerful ruler in the land. Yet Joseph's heart remained humble. When Pharaoh explained his predicament and expressed his hope that Joseph could interpret the dreams, Joseph's response was one of deep faith and reliance on God. "I cannot do it," Joseph said, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." With these words, Joseph set the stage for a moment that would reveal not only the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams, but also the divine wisdom that guided his own life. Pharaoh described his dreams with urgency and detail. In the first, he saw 7 fat and healthy cows grazing near the Nile, followed by 7 gaunt and ugly cows that devoured the healthy ones. In the second dream, he saw 7 heads of full and ripe grain, followed by 7 thin and scorched heads that swallowed up the healthy grain. Though the dreams were vivid and ominous, their meaning remained a mystery to Pharaoh and his court. Joseph listened attentively, and as he did, God revealed the interpretation to him. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same," Joseph explained. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." Joseph's interpretation was both clear and alarming. The 7 fat cows and 7 full heads of grain represented 7 years of abundance, a period when Egypt would experience great prosperity. But the 7 gaunt cows and 7 thin heads of grain symbolized 7 years of famine that would follow, a famine so severe that it would erase the memory of the years of plenty. Joseph's words were sobering, yet they carried a sense of purpose. "The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms," he added, "is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon." Joseph's confidence in the interpretation was rooted not in his own ability, but in his unwavering faith in God's sovereignty. But Joseph did not stop at interpreting the dreams. With a boldness born of divine insight, he offered Pharaoh a solution to the impending crisis. "Let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt," Joseph said. "Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years and store up the grain under Pharaoh's authority to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." It was a plan that demonstrated Joseph's strategic mind and his trust in God's guidance. A plan that not only addressed the immediate problem, but also ensured the survival of countless lives. Pharaoh and his court were astonished. Here was a man who not only interpreted the dreams with precision, but also presented a solution with wisdom and foresight. Pharaoh recognized that Joseph's abilities were not merely human, but divinely inspired. "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh asked. His decision was immediate and transformative. Turning to Joseph, he said, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In an instant, Joseph was elevated from prisoner to prime minister, second only to Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh formalized Joseph's new position by dressing him in fine linen robes, placing a gold chain around his neck, and giving him his signet ring, a symbol of royal authority. Joseph was paraded through the streets of Egypt in a chariot, with officials shouting, "Make way," to announce his rise to power. Pharaoh gave him the Egyptian name Zaphanath-Paneah and arranged his marriage to Asenath, the daughter of a prominent Egyptian priest. Joseph's transformation was complete. He was no longer just the young Hebrew boy sold into slavery. He was now the most powerful man in Egypt after Pharaoh. Joseph wasted no time in implementing the plan he had proposed. During the 7 years of abundance, he oversaw the collection and storage of surplus grain in cities across Egypt, ensuring that every measure was accounted for. The abundance was so great that the grain stored became immeasurable, like the sand of the sea. Joseph's diligence and foresight earned him the respect of the Egyptian people and solidified his position as a leader of extraordinary wisdom and capability. He was no longer just a dreamer, he was a doer, a man whose actions were guided by the God who had given him his dreams. As the years of abundance gave way to the years of famine, Joseph's leadership became even more critical. When the famine spread beyond Egypt to neighboring lands, people from all over came to buy grain from Joseph, who managed the reserves with precision and fairness. His plan, birthed in the dungeon and executed in the palace, became the lifeline for an entire region. Through Joseph, God's providence was on full display, ensuring not only the survival of Egypt, but also the preservation of the family that would carry forward his covenant promises. Joseph's rise to power is a testament to the faithfulness of God and the power of perseverance. From the depths of the dungeon to the heights of Pharaoh's court, Joseph's journey was marked by trust, humility, and unwavering faith. His ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams and implement a plan of salvation revealed not only his own gifts, but also the divine purpose that had been at work in his life all along. Joseph's story reminds us that no matter how dark our circumstances may seem, God is always working behind the scenes, preparing us for the plans He has set before us. Through Joseph, we see the truth that even in the midst of trials, God's purpose is never thwarted, and His timing is always perfect. The years of plenty in Egypt, overseen with meticulous care by Joseph, came to an abrupt end as the first signs of famine began to appear. Fields that had once yielded abundant crops now lay barren under a relentless sun. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt's agriculture, began to recede, and the granaries Joseph had filled during the prosperous years became the nation's lifeline. Across Egypt and the surrounding regions, the reality of the famine set in, leaving people desperate for relief. Yet, thanks to Joseph's foresight and God-given wisdom, Egypt was prepared in a way no other nation could have imagined. As the famine deepened, people from every corner of Egypt flocked to the cities to buy grain from the reserves Joseph had stored. His system was precise, ensuring that the grain was distributed fairly and efficiently. Joseph's leadership during this crisis earned him the admiration and trust of the Egyptian people, who saw him not just as a foreigner in a position of power, but as a savior whose wisdom had spared them from ruin. Under Joseph's guidance, Egypt became a beacon of stability in an otherwise desolate time, its granaries supplying not only its own citizens, but also those from neighboring lands. The famine's reach extended far beyond Egypt, affecting the entire region, including the land of Canaan, where Joseph's family resided. Jacob and his sons, like countless others, felt the full weight of the crisis. Their once thriving herds and fields could no longer sustain them, and desperation began to set in. Jacob, now an old man, learned of the grain stores in Egypt and saw a glimmer of hope. "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" he asked his sons. "I have heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." His words were a command and a plea, spurring the brothers into action. Unbeknownst to Jacob or his sons, this journey would lead them back to the brother they had betrayed so many years before. The 10 brothers, excluding Benjamin, whom Jacob kept close, unwilling to risk losing another beloved son, set out for Egypt with heavy hearts and empty sacks. They carried with them not only the burden of famine, but also the unspoken guilt of their past. Though the years had passed, the memory of selling Joseph into slavery lingered like a shadow, unspoken but ever present in their minds. Meanwhile, Joseph was busy managing the massive operation of grain distribution, his position now firmly established as second in command to Pharaoh. Every transaction, every shipment of grain, bore the mark of his careful planning and steadfast leadership. Yet, despite his success and the admiration of an entire nation, Joseph's heart carried its own burdens. He had risen to power, but his journey had been forged through betrayal, abandonment, and loss. Though he had made a life in Egypt, Joseph must have often wondered about his family in Canaan, the father who loved him, the brothers who had betrayed him, and the dreams that had once seemed so distant. It was against this backdrop that Joseph's past and present collided in an encounter that was as unexpected as it was significant. As Joseph sat overseeing the day's transactions, a group of men approached, seeking to buy grain. Their appearance was unremarkable to most, but to Joseph, they were instantly recognizable: his brothers. The very men who had thrown him into a cistern and sold him into slavery now stood before him, unaware that the powerful Egyptian official they were bowing to was the brother they believed was long gone. Joseph's heart must have raced as he took in the scene. Though his brothers did not recognize him, dressed as he was in Egyptian finery and speaking through an interpreter, Joseph knew them at once. The sight of them bowing before him brought his dreams flooding back. The visions he had shared so many years ago now fulfilled in a moment that was both surreal and bittersweet. Yet, Joseph did not immediately reveal his identity. Instead, he chose to test them, to discern whether the men who had once betrayed him had changed. Speaking sternly, Joseph accused them of being spies, come to uncover the weaknesses of Egypt. The brothers, panicked and desperate, protested, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Their words were an irony not lost on Joseph, who remembered all too well the dishonesty of their actions. Yet, their mention of their father and their younger brother Benjamin struck a chord in Joseph's heart. Joseph seized the opportunity to probe further. "If you are honest men," he said, "let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This demand sent the brothers into turmoil. Benjamin, Jacob's youngest and most cherished son, was the one Jacob had vowed to protect. Bringing him to Egypt would be no small task. The brothers, feeling the weight of their predicament, began to speak among themselves, unaware that Joseph could understand their words. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they said, the guilt of their actions toward Joseph bubbling to the surface. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come on us." Reuben, the eldest, added, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." Their words pierced Joseph's heart, a reminder of the pain he had endured and the guilt his brothers now carried. Overwhelmed by emotion, Joseph turned away to weep, unable to contain the flood of memories and feelings stirred by their presence. Yet, he quickly composed himself, determined to continue the test. He ordered Simeon to be bound and held as a prisoner, ensuring that the brothers would return with Benjamin. The remaining brothers were sent back to Canaan with grain, their sacks unknowingly filled with the silver they had brought to pay for it, a gesture from Joseph that would further unsettle them. As they journeyed back to Canaan, the brothers were filled with fear and uncertainty, their guilt mingling with their relief at having secured food for their families. When they discovered the silver in their sacks, their anxiety deepened. "What is this that God has done to us?" they wondered, sensing that their past sins were catching up with them. When they recounted the events to Jacob, their father was overcome with grief. The thought of sending Benjamin to Egypt was unbearable to him. "My son will not go down there with you," he declared. "If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." Thus, the stage was set for a reunion years in the making, one that would test the bonds of family, the power of forgiveness, and the sovereignty of God. The famine that had brought Joseph's brothers to Egypt was no coincidence, but a piece of a divine plan that was about to unfold in ways none of them could have imagined. The reunion between Joseph and his brothers was one of profound complexity, an encounter shaped by unspoken emotions, buried memories, and a divine purpose that was yet to fully reveal itself. When Joseph first recognized his brothers in the bustling granary of Egypt, they were simply men seeking to buy food in the midst of famine. But to Joseph, they were the faces of his past, the ones who had stripped him of his coat, his freedom, and for a time, his identity. Yet, they didn't recognize him. How could they? The 17-year-old boy they had betrayed was now a man of power and prestige, dressed in the robes of Egyptian authority and speaking through an interpreter. Still, Joseph knew exactly who they were, and the sight of them bowing before him was a striking fulfillment of the dreams that had once driven them to hatred. Joseph's initial response was not to reveal himself, but to conceal his identity, using the opportunity to test their character. He spoke to them harshly, accusing them of being spies sent to uncover the vulnerabilities of Egypt. The accusation threw the brothers into panic. Desperate to defend themselves, they pleaded their innocence, insisting they were honest men, sons of one father. "Your servants have never been spies," they protested, their voices trembling with fear. Joseph's heart must have ached at their words, knowing the truth about their past actions. But he pressed further, questioning them about their family and drawing out details about their father, Jacob, and their youngest brother, Benjamin. The mention of Benjamin struck a nerve for Joseph. Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel, had been just a child when Joseph was sold into slavery. The thought of his younger brother brought a flood of memories and emotions, but Joseph remained composed. He demanded proof of their honesty, telling them they must bring their youngest brother to Egypt if they wanted to clear their names. To ensure their compliance, Joseph held Simeon as a hostage, binding him before their eyes and ordering the rest to return to Canaan with grain for their families. "Do this, and you will not die," he declared, setting the terms of their test. As the brothers prepared to leave, their guilt over their past actions began to surface. They spoke among themselves in their native tongue, believing Joseph could not understand. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they said, their voices heavy with regret. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come on us." Reuben, the eldest, reminded them of his earlier warnings. "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." These words, filled with remorse and anguish, pierced Joseph's heart. Unable to contain his emotions, he turned away and wept, the years of pain and longing finally breaking through his carefully maintained composure. Yet, Joseph quickly regained control, determined to carry out his plan. He ordered his servants to fill his brothers' sacks with grain and secretly return their silver, slipping it into their bags without their knowledge. It was a gesture of kindness wrapped in mystery, one that would add another layer of tension to their journey. When the brothers discovered the silver on their way home, their fear deepened. "What is this that God has done to us?" they wondered, their minds racing with thoughts of divine judgment. The weight of their guilt, combined with the uncertainty of their situation, left them anxious and unsettled as they returned to Canaan. Back in their father's house, the brothers recounted the events in Egypt, explaining Joseph's demands and Simeon's detention. Their words filled Jacob with anguish. The thought of sending Benjamin, the last remaining son of Rachel, to Egypt was unthinkable. "You have deprived me of my children," Jacob cried. "Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." His grief was palpable, a reflection of the years he had spent mourning Joseph and now fearing for Benjamin's safety. Despite the brothers' pleas, Jacob refused to let Benjamin go, unwilling to risk another loss. As the famine persisted, however, Jacob's resolve began to waver. The grain the brothers had brought back from Egypt eventually ran out, and the family's survival once again hung in the balance. Judah, stepping into a leadership role among the brothers, spoke up with a bold proposal. "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you,'" he reminded Jacob. Offering himself as a guarantor for Benjamin's safety, Judah assured his father that he would bear the blame if anything happened to the boy. Reluctantly, Jacob agreed, sending Benjamin to Egypt along with the brothers, gifts for the mysterious Egyptian official, and double the silver to account for the money that had been returned. The brothers' return to Egypt marked the next phase of Joseph's test. When Joseph saw Benjamin for the first time, his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. Here was his youngest brother, now a young man, standing before him for the first time in years. Yet Joseph continued to conceal his identity, observing his brothers' interactions and gauging their character. He invited them to dine at his house, arranging them in order of their birth and lavishing Benjamin with a portion 5 times larger than the others. The gesture was deliberate, designed to see whether jealousy would rear its head as it had with Joseph years before. But to Joseph's relief, his brothers showed no signs of resentment, their behavior reflecting a unity that had not been present in the past. Even so, Joseph wasn't ready to reveal himself just yet. He devised one final test, planting his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and sending his steward to confront them as they departed. When the cup was discovered, the brothers were brought back to Joseph's house, where they faced the possibility of losing Benjamin forever. It was here, in their desperate pleas for Benjamin's release, that Joseph saw the transformation he had been searching for. Judah, the very brother who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery, now offered himself as a substitute, willing to sacrifice his own freedom to spare Benjamin and their father the pain of loss. This act of selflessness was a turning point, proving that the brothers who had once betrayed Joseph had changed. Through this intricate series of tests, Joseph not only witnessed his brothers' repentance, but also began to find healing for his own heart. The reunion, though not yet complete, was laying the groundwork for forgiveness and restoration. What had started as a moment of confrontation was evolving into a story of redemption, where old wounds would be healed and broken relationships would be mended. The brothers' journey to Egypt, driven by desperation and guilt, was leading them to a place of grace they could never have imagined. A place where they would come face to face with the brother they had wronged and the God who had been at work through it all. The moment of truth had arrived. After years of separation, countless trials, and carefully constructed tests, Joseph was ready to reveal his identity to his brothers. The weight of the secret he had carried for so long pressed heavily on him, but so too did the realization that this was not merely a family reunion. It was the culmination of God's divine plan. The brothers, unaware of the storm of emotions swirling within Joseph, stood before him in fear and uncertainty, awaiting his judgment. They had come to plead for Benjamin's release, with Judah offering himself as a substitute. But what awaited them was something far greater than punishment or retribution. Joseph's heart was overwhelmed. The transformation he had longed to see in his brothers was evident in Judah's impassioned plea. The same man who had once suggested selling Joseph into slavery now stood ready to sacrifice himself for Benjamin's sake. Judah's words were not just a defense of Benjamin. They were a testament to the guilt, growth, and love that had reshaped the brothers' hearts. Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He ordered all the Egyptian servants and officials to leave the room, ensuring that he was alone with his brothers. The air was thick with tension and expectation as the brothers watched the powerful Egyptian ruler, not knowing what was about to unfold. When the room was finally cleared, Joseph's composure broke. He began to weep, his cries so loud that they echoed throughout the palace, reaching even Pharaoh's household. The brothers, stunned by this unexpected display of emotion, could only stand in silence. Then, through his tears, Joseph spoke the words that would shatter the veil of mystery. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The revelation hit the brothers like a thunderclap. The man before them, the one they had feared, bowed to, and pleaded with, was the very brother they had betrayed all those years ago. Their shock quickly turned to fear. How could Joseph, now in a position of unparalleled power, respond to such a betrayal? Would he exact revenge? Would they pay the price for their sins? Joseph saw the terror in their faces, but his heart was not filled with anger or a desire for vengeance. It was filled with love and a deep understanding of the hand of God in his life. He quickly reassured them, saying, "Come close to me." Hesitantly, the brothers stepped forward, their fear mingled with awe. Joseph continued, his voice trembling with emotion, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." These words, spoken with sincerity and grace, turned their fear into relief and astonishment. Joseph's declaration, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good," became the cornerstone of their reconciliation. It was a profound acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, a reminder that even the most painful moments of life can be transformed into instruments of His divine purpose. Joseph explained how God had orchestrated every step of his journey, from the pit to the palace, to position him to save countless lives during the famine. His suffering had not been in vain. It had been part of a greater plan to preserve his family and fulfill God's covenantal promises. As the brothers listened, their guilt began to dissolve, replaced by gratitude and hope. Joseph's forgiveness was not just a release from the burden of their past sins. It was an invitation to restoration. He embraced each of them, his tears mingling with theirs, as years of pain and separation melted away. The scene was one of raw emotion and divine grace. A moment where brokenness gave way to healing, and estranged siblings were reunited in love. Joseph's thoughts quickly turned to his father, Jacob. The years of separation had left a void in his heart, and he longed to see his father again. He urged his brothers to return to Canaan with all haste, saying, "Hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." Joseph's desire was clear: to reunite his family and ensure their survival and prosperity under his protection. Pharaoh, upon hearing the news of Joseph's reunion with his brothers, offered his full support. He instructed Joseph to send wagons and provisions to bring his family to Egypt, sparing no expense to ensure their comfort and safety. The favor Joseph had earned from Pharaoh now extended to his entire family, a testament to the profound impact Joseph had made on the king and his court. The brothers departed for Canaan with full sacks and full hearts, carrying the incredible news that Joseph, whom they thought was dead, was not only alive but thriving. When the brothers reached Canaan and told Jacob, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt," the old man was stunned. He could scarcely believe their words, the weight of his grief and years of mourning clouding his ability to accept such a miraculous truth. But when he saw the wagons and provisions Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. "I'm convinced," Jacob declared. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." With those words, Jacob's long journey toward reunion and restoration began. The truth revealed in Joseph's emotional climax was more than a family secret uncovered. It was the unveiling of God's faithfulness and sovereignty. Through Joseph's forgiveness and love, the wounds of betrayal were healed, and a family once fractured by jealousy and sin was made whole again. Joseph's ability to see God's hand in every moment of his life, even the most painful, allowed him to rise above bitterness and offer his brothers not just forgiveness, but a future. It was a testament to the transformative power of grace and the redemptive nature of God's plans. As Jacob and his family prepared to move to Egypt, they were not merely relocating, they were stepping into the next chapter of God's covenantal story. The land of Goshen, offered to them by Pharaoh, would become a place of provision and growth, laying the foundation for the nation of Israel. Joseph's revelation was the turning point in a story that had begun with betrayal and ended with reconciliation. A reminder that God can take what is meant for harm and use it for His glory. The reunion and the truth revealed underscore one of the most profound lessons of Joseph's story: that forgiveness, when rooted in faith and guided by divine purpose, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. In forgiving his brothers, Joseph not only restored his family but also demonstrated the heart of God, a heart that redeems, restores, and never abandons his people. The journey to restoration that had begun with Joseph's revelation to his brothers reached its emotional pinnacle as Jacob and his family prepared to move to Egypt. For years, Jacob had carried the heavy burden of grief, believing his beloved son Joseph to be dead. The news that Joseph was alive and thriving as a ruler in Egypt had revived his spirit, but the prospect of seeing his son again filled him with a mixture of joy, disbelief, and anticipation. The family, now united by a common purpose, began the preparations for their monumental journey, a journey not just of physical relocation but of spiritual renewal and familial redemption. Jacob, now an old man, stood as the patriarch of a family that had endured its share of trials and divisions. His decision to leave Canaan was not made lightly. Canaan was the land promised to his forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, and the place where God's covenant seemed to take root. Yet, the prospect of seeing Joseph and ensuring the survival of his family outweighed his concerns. Before departing, Jacob sought confirmation of God's blessing. At Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac, seeking reassurance that this move to Egypt was part of God's plan. That night, God spoke to Jacob in a vision, saying, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." These words, a reaffirmation of God's covenantal promises, gave Jacob the peace and confidence he needed to move forward. The caravan that set out from Canaan was a sight to behold. Jacob's entire household, his sons, daughters, grandchildren, and servants, traveled together with their livestock and possessions. Pharaoh's wagons, sent by Joseph, made the journey more comfortable, a testament to the favor Joseph had secured for his family. The procession was not merely a migration, but the beginning of a new chapter in the story of God's people. What had once been a fractured family, torn apart by jealousy and betrayal, was now moving together toward reconciliation and renewal. As they approached Egypt, the anticipation of the reunion between Jacob and Joseph grew. Joseph, who had waited years for this moment, prepared his chariot and set out to meet his father. The sight of Jacob, now aged and weathered but alive and well, brought tears to Joseph's eyes. As he approached, Joseph's emotions overwhelmed him, and he embraced his father, weeping with the joy and relief of a son who had longed for this moment. Jacob, too, was overcome with emotion. For years he had believed Joseph was dead, and now, seeing him alive and in a position of power, he could hardly contain his gratitude. "Now I am ready to die," Jacob said, "since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." The reunion was more than a meeting of father and son. It was a moment that underscored the themes of redemption and God's faithfulness. Through all the trials, separations, and uncertainties, God had been at work, weaving together a plan that would not only restore Joseph to his family, but also position them for a future that would fulfill his covenantal promises. Joseph's journey, from the pit to the palace, was a testament to God's sovereignty, and Jacob's reunion with his son was a tangible reminder that God's purposes are always for good, even when they are beyond human understanding. Joseph, ever mindful of his role as both son and leader, guided his family through their transition into Egyptian life. He instructed them to tell Pharaoh that they were shepherds, a profession looked down upon by Egyptians, but one that would ensure they could settle in the land of Goshen. Goshen, a fertile region, was ideally suited for their livestock and would provide the family with a place to thrive while remaining distinct from the Egyptian culture. When Pharaoh met Jacob, the encounter was one of mutual respect. Jacob, though aged and weary from his journey, blessed Pharaoh, a gesture that reflected his role as a patriarch and a man of faith. As Jacob and his family settled in Goshen, the sense of restoration deepened. For the first time in years, the family was together, free from the divisions and betrayals that had once plagued them. Joseph, though consumed with his responsibilities as Pharaoh's right-hand man, made time to ensure his family's needs were met. He provided them with food and resources, shielding them from the worst effects of the ongoing famine. The brothers, now humbled by their experiences, treated Joseph and one another with newfound respect, their guilt replaced by gratitude for the grace they had been shown. For Jacob, the years he spent in Egypt were a time of peace and reflection. He marveled at how God had preserved his family through the most unlikely circumstances. The son he had mourned was now his protector, and the family he feared would fracture had been restored. In these final years, Jacob's faith in God's promises was unwavering. As he neared the end of his life, he called Joseph to his side, asking him to swear that his body would be returned to Canaan for burial. Jacob's desire to be laid to rest in the land of his forefathers was a testament to his belief in God's covenant, a belief that the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and himself would one day be fulfilled. The restoration of Jacob's family in Egypt was not just a resolution to their personal struggles. It was a pivotal moment in the greater narrative of God's plan for his people. Through Joseph's trials and triumphs, God had positioned the family to survive the famine and grow into a nation. What had begun as a story of betrayal and separation had become a story of forgiveness, reconciliation, and divine providence. The family's move to Egypt, though seemingly a detour from the Promised Land, was part of a divine strategy that would shape the destiny of Israel. The themes of redemption and God's faithfulness are woven throughout this chapter of Joseph's story. His ability to forgive his brothers and provide for his family was a reflection of the grace he had received from God. Jacob's reunion with Joseph was a reminder that God's plans often take unexpected paths, but they always lead to his purposes. The family's restoration was not just a moment of personal healing. It was a foreshadowing of the greater redemption that God would bring through his covenant with Abraham's descendants. As Jacob and his family settled into their new lives in Goshen, the story of Joseph and his family reached a point of harmony that had once seemed impossible. The years of pain and separation had given way to joy and unity, and the family that had been broken was now whole. Through it all, God's hand had been at work, guiding them through the trials and into the blessings he had prepared for them. The restoration of Jacob's family is a testament to the truth that no situation is beyond the reach of God's grace, and that his plans for his people are always good. Joseph's final years in Egypt were marked by peace, prosperity, and the deep fulfillment of seeing his family restored and thriving. As second in command to Pharaoh, Joseph used his position of influence to ensure the well-being of his people. The land of Goshen, fertile and abundant, became a haven for Jacob's descendants, a place where they could flourish despite the famine that continued to ravage the surrounding regions. Joseph's careful management of resources, his foresight, and his commitment to fairness had solidified his reputation not only as a leader, but also as a man of integrity and wisdom. Under his guidance, Egypt remained a beacon of stability, and the Israelites, though far from Canaan, experienced a season of blessing that allowed them to grow and prosper. For Joseph, seeing his family united and cared for was a source of profound joy. The pain of betrayal and separation that had defined his early years was now a distant memory, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that God's plan had prevailed. He had risen from the depths of a pit to the heights of Egyptian power, not by his own strength, but by the providence of God, who had orchestrated every step of his journey. Joseph's leadership extended beyond mere governance. It was an expression of his faith and gratitude. He served not only Pharaoh, but also his family and, ultimately, God, recognizing that his position was a fulfillment of the dreams that had once seemed so far out of reach. As the years passed, Joseph watched his family grow. The sons of Jacob, once divided by jealousy and strife, became the foundation of a burgeoning nation. Joseph's own sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, played a central role in this growth, their place among the tribes of Israel secured by Jacob's blessing. For Joseph, this was another affirmation of God's faithfulness, a reminder that even in a foreign land, God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob remained steadfast. The family's time in Egypt was not a detour from God's plan, but a necessary step in the unfolding of his covenant. Joseph's faith in this promise never wavered, even as he grew older and the end of his life drew near. As Joseph approached the twilight of his years, his thoughts turned increasingly toward the God who had guided him through every trial and triumph. He reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal by his brothers, the years of slavery and imprisonment, and the eventual rise to power that had positioned him to save countless lives. Through it all, Joseph saw the unmistakable hand of God at work, turning what others meant for harm into something extraordinary. This understanding gave him peace and clarity as he prepared for the end of his earthly life. Joseph's faith in God's promises was unwavering, even as he faced the reality of his own mortality. Though he had spent the majority of his life in Egypt, his heart remained tied to the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised to his forefathers. As he gathered his family around him, Joseph made a request that reflected his enduring trust in God's covenant. "I am about to die," he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "But God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when God comes to your aid, you must carry my bones up from this place." This request was more than a practical instruction. It was a declaration of faith. By asking his family to carry his remains back to Canaan, Joseph reaffirmed his belief in the promises of God, a belief that extended beyond his own lifetime. He understood that his story was part of a much larger narrative, one that would continue through the generations of his family and culminate in the fulfillment of God's covenant. Joseph's words were a reminder to his descendants that Egypt, though a place of provision and growth, was not their final home. Their ultimate destiny lay in the land that God had set apart for them. Joseph's final days were spent in peace, surrounded by the family he had fought so hard to protect and provide for. He lived to see the third generation of his descendants, a testament to the blessings God had poured out on his life. As he watched his children and grandchildren grow, Joseph must have marveled at the way God had turned his suffering into a story of redemption. The boy who had once been cast into a pit by his own brothers was now the patriarch of a family destined to become a great nation. It was a legacy built not on his own strength, but on the faithfulness of God, who had been with him through every trial and triumph. When Joseph finally passed away at the age of 110, his death marked the end of an era. Yet, his legacy endured, a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and divine providence. His body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, but his story did not end there. True to his request, Joseph's bones would eventually be carried out of Egypt during the Exodus, a powerful reminder of the promise that had sustained him throughout his life. Even in death, Joseph's faith pointed his family back to God and the land he had promised them. The final chapter of Joseph's life underscores the central themes of his story: the faithfulness of God, the power of redemption, and the importance of trusting in his promises. Joseph's ability to see God's hand in every aspect of his journey allowed him to live with peace and purpose, even in the face of hardship. His unwavering trust in God's covenant became a source of hope and inspiration for his family, shaping their identity and their future. As his descendants grew and flourished in Egypt, they carried with them the memory of Joseph, a man who had lived and led with integrity, faith, and a deep understanding of God's sovereignty. Joseph's final years were not marked by regret or longing for what might have been. Instead, they were a celebration of God's providence and a declaration of faith in his unchanging promises. The story of Joseph reminds us that even the most difficult seasons of life can be part of a greater purpose, one that we may not fully understand in the moment, but that will ultimately reveal the glory of God. Through Joseph's life, we see the power of trusting in God's plan, the beauty of forgiveness, and the hope that comes from knowing that his promises are always true. As the family of Israel stood on the brink of their next chapter, Joseph's legacy served as a guiding light, pointing them toward the fulfillment of the covenant that had shaped their identity and their destiny. The story of Joseph is one of the most profound narratives in Scripture, rich with themes that continue to resonate across centuries. At its heart, it is a story of forgiveness, resilience, and divine sovereignty. A narrative that transcends its historical context to speak to the struggles and triumphs of humanity in every generation. Joseph's life, marked by betrayal, hardship, and ultimate redemption, serves as a testament to the enduring truth that God's purposes prevail, even in the face of human failings and unforeseen challenges. As we reflect on his journey, we find lessons that not only inspire, but also equip us to navigate the complexities of our own lives. One of the most striking themes in Joseph's story is the transformative power of forgiveness. Few experiences cut deeper than betrayal by those closest to us, yet Joseph's response to his brother's treachery is nothing short of remarkable. After being sold into slavery, enduring years of separation, and rising to a position of power, Joseph had every opportunity to seek revenge. Instead, he chose a path of grace, declaring to his brothers, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." This statement is a profound reminder that forgiveness is not merely a release of anger, but a recognition of God's greater plan. Joseph's ability to forgive was rooted in his trust in God's sovereignty, a trust that allowed him to see beyond his own pain and extend mercy to those who had wronged him. In our modern world, where grievances often escalate into bitterness and division, Joseph's example challenges us to approach conflict with humility and grace. Forgiveness is not an easy path. It requires vulnerability and strength, but it is a path that leads to healing and restoration. Whether in personal relationships, communities, or even nations, the act of forgiveness has the power to break cycles of pain and pave the way for reconciliation. Joseph's story reminds us that forgiveness is not about excusing wrongs, but about choosing to see the hand of God at work, even in the midst of betrayal. Another central theme in Joseph's story is resilience. From the moment he was thrown into the cistern by his brothers to his rise as Pharaoh's second in command, Joseph's life was a testament to the power of perseverance and faith. Despite facing unimaginable trials, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment, Joseph never allowed his circumstances to define him. Instead, he remained steadfast, trusting in the dreams God had given him and working diligently wherever he found himself. His resilience was not merely a matter of personal strength, but a reflection of his deep faith in God's promises. In a world where challenges often feel overwhelming and the weight of adversity can crush even the strongest spirits, Joseph's story offers hope. It reminds us that resilience is not about denying the pain of our struggles, but about enduring them with faith and purpose. Joseph's ability to rise above his circumstances and remain faithful in every season of life demonstrates the importance of trusting God, even when the path ahead is unclear. His journey encourages us to persevere, knowing that God is at work in ways we cannot yet see. Perhaps the most profound theme in Joseph's story is the sovereignty of God. From the very beginning, Joseph's life was guided by a divine plan that unfolded through both triumphs and trials. The dreams that once made him the target of his brother's jealousy were the same dreams that positioned him to save not only his family, but also an entire region during the famine. Each twist and turn in Joseph's journey, from the pit to the palace, was part of a larger narrative orchestrated by God. This overarching theme of divine sovereignty reminds us that nothing in our lives is wasted. Even our most painful experiences can be transformed into opportunities for growth, redemption, and purpose. In our modern lives, it can be difficult to see God's hand at work, especially in the midst of hardship. Yet Joseph's story reassures us that God's plans are always good, even when they take us through seasons of suffering. The assurance that God meant it for good invites us to trust in His timing and His purposes, knowing that He is weaving every thread of our lives into a greater tapestry. Joseph's life challenges us to surrender our fears and uncertainties to God, embracing the truth that His ways are higher than ours. The relevance of Joseph's story extends far beyond its historical context. Its themes speak to universal human experiences: the pain of betrayal, the struggle to forgive, the resilience needed to overcome adversity, and the hope found in trusting God's sovereignty. In a world marked by division, injustice, and uncertainty, Joseph's journey offers a roadmap for living with faith, integrity, and purpose. His story encourages us to reflect on our own lives and the ways in which God might be working through our challenges to accomplish His will. Joseph's life also invites us to consider the role of leadership and service. As a leader, Joseph demonstrated wisdom, humility, and a commitment to serving others. His ability to manage Egypt's resources during the years of plenty and famine was not just a display of administrative skill, but also an expression of his faith and reliance on God. In our own lives, whether we are leading families, communities, or organizations, Joseph's example reminds us that true leadership is about stewardship and service, using our gifts and positions to glorify God and bless others. The themes of Joseph's story are also deeply personal, encouraging each of us to examine our own journeys. How do we respond to betrayal and adversity? Are we willing to forgive, even when it feels undeserved? Do we trust in God's sovereignty, even when his plans seem unclear? Joseph's life challenges us to embrace a faith that is not shaken by circumstances, but grounded in the knowledge that God is always at work, turning what is meant for harm into something good. The story of Joseph is a timeless narrative that speaks to the deepest needs of the human heart. It reminds us of the power of forgiveness to heal wounds, the strength of resilience to overcome challenges, and the assurance of God's sovereignty in guiding our lives. As we reflect on Joseph's journey, we are invited to trust in the same God who was with him in the pit, the prison, and the palace, a God who is with us in every moment of our lives. Whether we are facing trials, celebrating victories, or navigating the uncertainties of the present, Joseph's story offers hope and encouragement, reminding us that God's plans are always good and his purposes are always for our ultimate redemption. Before we close, let's reflect on Joseph's incredible story and the lessons it teaches us about faith, forgiveness, and the sovereignty of God through a powerful prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the life of Joseph and the truths his story reveals. Thank you for reminding us that your plans are greater than our struggles, and that even in the darkest moments, you are working for our good. Lord, we ask for the courage to forgive those who have wronged us, just as Joseph forgave his brothers. Teach us to trust in your timing and to hold fast to the promises you have given us, even when we cannot see the way forward. May we be resilient in our faith, steadfast in our hope, and willing vessels for your purpose. Help us to remember, Lord, that just as you redeemed Joseph's pain and used it to save lives, you can redeem our trials and use them for your glory. Let this story inspire us to live with humility, integrity, and a deep trust in your sovereignty. We surrender our fears, doubts, and uncertainties to you, knowing that you are the author of our lives and the architect of our futures. We ask for your guidance, protection, and strength as we walk forward, confident that your plans for us are always good. In Jesus' name we pray, Amen. If Joseph's story has touched your heart today and you found inspiration in these timeless lessons, please like this video, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that encourage, uplift, and transform. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of God's unchanging faithfulness. Thank you for being part of this journey with us, and we'll see you in the next video.